our eventual goal is that everybody has some level of access to AI. What AI is doing for us is it's removing the barriers to entry. If I can't write, I can speak. From where I started, I do not think that today Africa needs hyperscalers. The thing we're trying to solve for is the demand, the value that we're going to provide. We're not trying to solve for hyperscalers. You can't go solve for a hyperscaler. They've solved their problems already, right? So let's solve the problems that we have here at the scale that we can solve them. I firmly believe everybody has a risk budget, right? If you look at us in this room, there's 5 of us. My risk budget might be $100, yours might be $50, his might be $200, yours might be $2,000. We all have a risk budget. That's like the thing we can commit to and say, okay, well, if it fails, it fails. I'm not going to lose sleep, right? It doesn't knock you out completely. Now, what happens when we combine our risk budget? It gets bigger, right?
Welcome back to Why Should We Care About African Data Centers, a podcast where we tackle the big questions shaping the industry. I'm your host, Ville Wacklin, and today I'm joined by Raymond Ononiwu, who is the founder and CEO of Horus Labs, where he's building modular AI data centers in Africa. He's worked with global tech firms and startups, and today he's focused on bridging the digital divide and creating opportunities for Africa's tech ecosystem. Raymond, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ville.
Can you tell me a bit more about your career and how did you end up in Rwanda?
Oh yeah, interesting story. My career actually started, I did a stint of civil engineering. I did about 3 years of civil engineering in college, and I think it was late 2007 or 2008. A friend of mine who was a Burmese network engineer had told me, he said, I think you're really going to be good at this computer thing. Have you ever considered getting into networking or systems or software? At the time, I said no. I had no interest. I actually didn't get to see a computer till I was 15, after high school. And so he hands me this big Cisco book with a network router. And he says, plug this in, read the book, go have fun. 3 months later, I changed my major to computer science. I went back to school from scratch. It just never occurred to me to figure out how some of these things work. But the moment I started tinkering with it, the interest was developed. So I went back to school for computer science. I actually started out on the infrastructure side. Data centers, co-location before, the cloud and hyperscalers were a big deal. I worked in infrastructure and systems for a small company in California. And then I was doing that and going to school at the same time. And then right when I finished school, I got a job at Microsoft. I had interned and then transitioned into a full-time employee. So spent quite a bit of time there doing a lot of software. Took a break for 2 years, bootstrapped 2 startups, went back for another 2 years, and then just recently ended my time at Microsoft again. Yeah. So it's been infrastructure, a lot of software entrepreneurship, more software in the AI space, and then back to infrastructure as an entrepreneur. Yep.
Okay. And what about the Rwanda part?
Oh, Rwanda, yes. Rwanda is an interesting story. I'm married to a Rwandan, and so when we made the decision to move back, Rwanda was naturally a good option. It's also a place where the tech ecosystem is growing. There's a lot of regulatory and government sort of willingness to move things forward in the digital space. So it's a great place to build things. It's a great place to develop, to prototype, and then to scale out from Rwanda, right? But the willingness is there, and the planning is there to move the country forward in the tech sector.
How about the bureaucracy? Like just, about setting up the business, registration and all that. Has that been made easy, or is that a struggle? Do you need to go through agents and all these layers? Or
no, it's relatively easy actually. It's one of the easiest places I would say to get a business set up and to get started, right? So it has the right climate for you to get started, right? And so from a bureaucratic, for the processes, it's really you go to the Rwanda Development Board. There's a one-stop center, and typically what's involved is you have someone sort of handhold you through the entire process till you get your registration done.
Okay, that's great to hear. That's not the story everywhere, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's not the story everywhere else.
Yeah. So we are talking today about AI in Africa. So what's the story of AI in Africa so far?
I think it's still being written. There isn't a story yet, and that's the beauty of it. When you look at the AI space, one of the things that's happened is now we have technology in our hands that, gives us the capability to do so much more. It's like it's essentially, I wouldn't even say it's a catalyst. It's like a companion that has just like 100x more power than the average human. It just brings all the data, all the resources, all the computing sort of within grasp. And so from an African perspective, I think the story will differ. It won't be necessarily a cohesive story. It might look more like an anthology, right? Every episode is different, right? Everyone's tales will be different all the way from North Africa down to the South. And the reason being Africa's problems are quite unique, mostly domain specific. So I think the most important thing in the writing of this story is to put the tools, the equivalent of the pen and the paper in people's hands. It's going to be like, think about storytelling, right? The stories that people tell in Finland are different from the stories people tell in Nairobi and the ones people tell in Rwanda. But the only way we hear these stories is if we put the right tools in their hands to document them, right? And then we get to piece together the human story. It's going to be similar for Africa. What we need to do is put the tools in people's hands so they write the story. So that eventually over time, we get to hear those different stories from the different parts of the continent and what AI was able to help solve for those parts of the continent.
Yeah, makes sense. So you will be part of this story. You are building AI infrastructure in Rwanda. Could you share more about that project and also your company?
Yeah. I think our company, I'll start with our company, right? We started out, having done a long stint in software, the natural inclination is, go build software, right? Find opportunities that exist, build the software for it, and move things forward. But one of the things you learn, in the engineering practice is just, especially in big tech, is problem solving in general, right? Sometimes you want to solve a problem, but the real root of the issue is not the thing you're trying to solve. You have to go one layer deeper, right? And over time, you build the fearlessness to go one layer deeper to sort of go tackle that problem. In most parts of the continent, the issue that I've seen is just there's a significant lack of infrastructure. Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, has, I think, about 150 to 160 data centers. The next largest count is Australia with over 200, right? So an entire continent of over 1 billion people, we're still sub 200 data centers. And, we're competing with the United States that has about 3,000, right? So it's that shortage already tells you the quality of software, the availability is not going to be world-class, right? So you run into that issue where the infrastructure is not necessarily there. And then there isn't a cohesive platform story, right? If I wanted to, you have, a variety of platforms, open source stuff. You have your AWSs and your Azures and whatnot. But if I wanted to build software and deploy it to West US, I could go in Azure or AWS, select a region, deploy my software there. If I want to do the same thing in West Europe, I just select West Europe and I do the same thing there. There's a cohesive story. The infrastructure that I get in this side of the world, I can expect to get on the other side. One of the issues Africa faces is if I'm in Nigeria today and, for example, I go roll my own hardware and I build really amazing software and it works very well, there's no cohesive story that allows me to take that same bit of software and seamlessly expand into the market. Go to Cameroon, go to Ghana, go to other places, right? You start again the cycle of how do I get hardware? How do I get VMs? How do I now connect the locations, right? So these problems exist. And it makes it very difficult for the average entrepreneur, for the average researcher, for governments and whatnot to sort of try things very quickly, get to meaningful conclusions and iterate. It makes it very difficult for that to happen. And so, naturally what you do is you start to look at that space and say, what is it that can be done? What are the differences? How can we fix this issue? Now, there's the engineering part of it, which is networks and hardware and all that stuff. There's the regulatory part of it, cross-border transactions, cross-border data, all of that, right? So that's now a secondary thing to sort of tackle. But when I look at the continent, right, that is the underlying thing that sort of made us say, okay, let's go try to build a cohesive story for at least in a regional way, right? Can I, create something regionally that maps, on the eastern part to the western part, right, where there's commonality, and I can have, I'm guaranteed the same underlying platform-based infrastructure and the ability for people to go do things quickly. The other thing is, in the age of AI, right, one of the things that I think the continent can do very well, we're again at another significant milestone in technology. We cannot afford to wait and be handed a story, right? I mean, we all know this is sort of the typical thing that happens in Africa. You get handed a story and you try to align with that story, but we all see that doesn't always work, right? So this is an opportunity for us to do the hard work and build from the ground up. And our eventual goal is that everybody has some level of access to AI, right? And what that looks like is, you and I have got our chat GPTs on our smartphones. Majority of the continent is still feature phones, right? What's the story for AI and feature phones, right? That's the goal, is so that the average person who can do mobile money can pay for AI tokens with whatever mobile money components they have. Now, they might not have the full feature set, but they should have some access to it, right? We have language models that are, quite robust. What AI is doing for us is it's removing the barriers to entry. If I am not, if I can't write, I can speak. You see what I mean, right? So we have various input mechanisms now that allow us to go access things. So our job should be to bring AI into those spaces so that across economic strata, there's an entry point for everyone.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then that equal access to these platforms is obviously a big issue on the continent. While, the upper half of the population in terms of economics can access and afford these applications, then there is a big bunch of people who can. But yeah, that's let's see how we can tackle that. But we are recording this at ITW in Nairobi in September. And what are the latest updates from your project?
We're hoping to break ground before the end of the year. We're now in a space where we have put on our armor and we're in the GPU wars, right? Trying to get GPUs is very difficult, right? So we're talking to a couple of OEMs. Rwanda being a tier 2 country, there are sort of there are restrictions on what you can get, how much you can get, the whole 9 yards. So we're trying to navigate all of that, export licensing to make sure that we can actually get started. I also don't think that, we, of course, want to get the latest GPUs, right? At this point, it's the B200s or B300s. Terribly expensive, but our goal is to be at the bleeding edge at every point, right? However, if we can't get that one generation, we'll get like a previous generation set of GPUs. But the idea being, we will get started, we will innovate, and, we will drive as much change as possible with whatever we can do. But right now, it's getting all the vendors and bargaining for price and whatnot. So that's where we are.
So can you just give a context to that challenge of getting those GPUs? Like how difficult it is to get them? Like who are you competing with, and like what kind of somersaults you have to do to get them?
It's not necessarily, I wouldn't even say there's competition, right? Well, from a supply perspective, most of the big hyperscalers are buying hundreds of thousands and millions of GPUs, right? We're asking for sub 1,000 to begin with, right? So that's one thing. Now, you go to the cost component. You're paying, $4 million for something the size of a closet. I'm pretty sure all of us would love a $4 million home. It'd be very nice with a sauna, backyard, everything, right? So these things are terribly expensive. It's also the case that the equipment you need. So it's kind of interesting because it's like technology moved into the Rolls-Royce category where you need liquid coolant for, to be able to serve public inference and, have a GPU cluster that performs, at peak load and the whole nine yards. So it's a very expensive venture, right? And on the continent, the question now becomes where we will innovate is how do we actually provide the value that we want to provide at a price point that allows us to break even, right? Because a lot of times what happens is ideas are great. You actually genuinely want to provide value, but 6 months later, you can't keep the lights on. Right. So it's now the innovative part is not just the technology, but it's also how do we do this in a way that keeps the lights on. Right. Because it's very high CapEx. At this conference alone, there have been a lot of people, who are providing financing and the whole nine yards. But I'll be honest with you, even they are a bit risk averse. Right. I've spoken to a bunch of people and it's like, OK, look, we want to finance. Right. But it's different when I'm telling you that I'm going to buy, 4 racks that's almost 10 million. Now the risk category becomes different. It's like, why don't you just do what everyone's doing and do co-location? Why is your data center not co-location, right? So you start to explain, look, this is a different model. We're moving into a new age and we're looking for people who take the risk with us, right? So you also realize that from the financing aspect of things, the continent hasn't quite, especially when I talk to a lot of financiers, they haven't quite caught up to the risk profile of what's happening. In the US, there are mechanisms that allow you to sort of R&D, take on that initial risk, find out, and banks are, willing because they've seen time and, time again that technology will eventually provide the return. So they're willing to pony up the money and allow you to take the risk. But there's still a little bit of hesitation here on the continent. So there's that bit, which is, luckily for us, we have financiers who sort of understand the risk and say, look, we're on board with you, right? How do we mitigate that risk? You don't go fill a data center with GPUs, right? You don't go build out an entire cluster at once. You build modular, step by step. You deploy a bit, you drive the demand, provide value to the customers, and then you deploy more. So that helps us mitigate that risk. But you have the financial risk, you have the export licensing risk. When you're a tier 2 country, there's restrictions on what GPUs you can get. And this is all coming from the US government, of course. And there's also, specific rules around end user license agreements. Where are those GPUs going? Who's going to be using those GPUs? So there's quite a list of things that need to be satisfied for it to, make sense from a purchasing perspective. So those are sort of the complexities that you face. So even if you had all the money, doesn't necessarily mean you'll get all the GPUs, right? And then it's also the case that a lot of times when we have conversations about GPUs, right, it's you have a GPU, but you need to put in a server that will help you use the GPU. Right. So that's another cost. And typically, you want to optimize for space and efficiency. So, the average GPU server will have like 8 GPUs. And then if you're running that singular GPU server for your own like in-house or personal workloads, not an issue. You can air cool it with an air conditioner. When you want to serve the public and you have a bunch of GPUs, their thermal output alone demands that you can't air cool it. Right, especially the modern GPUs. They put out a lot of heat, so now you have to do direct-to-chip cooling, and then you need the mechanisms for that, right? Which is a rack, chillers, CDUs, and the whole nine yards. So all of those components start to become a thing. And now what we're realizing also is with the modern GPUs, when you go to NVIDIA and say, I want GPUs, they refer you back to a vendor, your Dells, your Supermicros. And then Supermicro says, hey, we're going to sell you these racks that have 10 GPUs in them with a coolant distribution unit. And it's got all these custom manifolds. And what that does is you're now a Supermicro person, right? So down the line, when you build your data center, especially because we're building modular, you sort of start to lock into where you get the best support, the best price, like a good ecosystem to work with, because there's more of a longer term life cycle that you have to deal with. You also have to worry about things like parts, maintenance. Being on the continent, there isn't a lot of, you can't just find somebody who can work on a liquid cooled rack. It's not that simple. In the US, most of these people are working for the hyperscalers already. So the other challenge that we have to face is we have to skill up, right? I have done software for years, but I'm like deeply learning everything that has to do with, how do I manage a liquid cooled rack, right? What should I expect? The turbidity of water, thermal output, all of that stuff. I have to sort of relearn that from scratch and now grow a team that learns that as well.
Where do you find the people who have that skill set on the continent in Rwanda?
It's a challenge. The answer is not yet. This is also part of where the innovations come in, right? One of our design partners is Schneider. And Schneider's doing a pretty good job at helping us upscale. That's part of what we're going to do with them. So internally, we're going to upscale. We're going to build a team where, the CEO or the CFO can go look at a rack and know what to do. That's the kind of team we want to build. And so Schneider's helping us with that. And, we're also now seeding that ecosystem, right? One of the things we want to do is really sort of embed with educational institutions and say, look, for everyone who's coming out of college, with a computer science degree or whatnot, why don't we just not go to the top and start writing code? Let's go all the way down to, do an internship at the data center, understand what modern data centers look like, and work your way all the way from infrastructure up to hardware and then up to the software. So that you have a holistic understanding of, how the computing world works, right? So that's some of the stuff we're doing. But not only are we putting in that first AI cluster, we're also learning, how to be the first people to manage that, to work on that and start to build that out over time.
That's great. We're actually also working in that education space, so we should take that conversation offline as well. So let's continue that after the session. Okay, so I think you spoke about this already a little bit, but like in a summarized way, what makes your project different and how will you succeed? Understanding that a lot of the data centers on the continent are, not doing great.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. Being at this conference, of course, you sort of see the challenges that people are facing. A lot of data centers on the continent are primarily co-location, right? You put up an apartment building, you put out an ad, people come in, bring their furniture. We're more like a 5-star hotel. You show up with your suitcase and you stay, and we have everything you need, right? So we're not just going to provide, when I talked earlier about the problems that sort of led us into this space, there's the infrastructure problem, reliable infrastructure. Then the second thing is, how do I use that infrastructure, the platforms? Most co-location centers today, if I needed to get some space, right, I'd either have to bring in my own hardware, my own servers, and someone would go put them up. There's some lead time to that. Or I just request space on hardware they've got already. If I wanted to request hardware space or compute space on Azure or AWS, I go online, I put in my credit card, and in a matter of 2 to 5 minutes, I have the capacity that I need. Now, it's not a trivial endeavor, right? And I understand why a lot of people don't go into that space. There's the tooling, there's the software, there's all the stuff you have to maintain. There's also, we have moved into this world where the assumption of the average person or whoever uses any of these platforms is that there's an infinite amount of compute. We've made it seem that way. Hyperscalers have made it seem that way. So when you look at the amount of compute required to provide that level of service, it's prohibitive. It's extremely expensive. I don't expect any country on the continent today to go spend that kind of money on compute. We've got hungry people to feed. We have social needs, right? So our story, again, doesn't have to be the one that's handed to us. However, there's some things that we can fix, right? From the existing data centers, the delta for us is that when we provide that infrastructure, we'll provide the mechanisms to seamlessly access that infrastructure, right? And what that looks like is the average developer can, maybe watch a YouTube video and be interested in something and quickly hop over to our platform, set up what they need, try what they want to try out for a fraction of, money. The other big challenge on the continent is payment mechanisms, right? We don't have a lot of countries or banking institutions that allow you to do like pre-auths, right? In the US and Europe, I can put in a card and I get reoccurring billing, for example. We have to find a way to work with the mechanisms we have. Mobile money, right? USSD, right? So we now need to, what we're working on is a clever combination of all of that, the local payment mechanisms, seamless platforms that allow you to access the compute in order to meet that check mark of, you don't need to call me to use the platform. Now, on the other side where it's infinitely scalable, right? We're not going to hit that on day one, right? And that's why when you start with a country like Rwanda with about 15 million people, our goal is to first meet the compute needs of Rwanda, right? Let's make it infinitely scalable in Rwanda first. We learn the challenges, we understand, where the bottlenecks are, and then you scale out to the next big thing, right? But it is the case that if you look at internal demand in most countries, it doesn't actually require hyperscalers, right? So our goal is to start modular, provide everything that is needed to be able to drive demand and to provide value to the end user, and then just scale up from there. Another thing that we like I mentioned, common infrastructure across multiple countries. When you look at a couple of the regional institutions, for example, banks, right? You tend to have the same banks in Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda. A lot of them still have to roll their own infrastructure, right? So for institutions like that, we will be able to build private clouds that span those locations so that you have common infrastructure, you have a common platform, right? And you can go just do your banking, right? A lot of the businesses on the continent veer off their core and start going into tech, right? The success of a business is to be hyper-focused at your core as much as possible. So what we want to drive for governments, for financial institutions, is to help them stay as close to the core as possible. Now, what that looks like, yet again, is not necessarily just only the infrastructure and platform, but we're going to forward deploy and say, hey, these two engineers, someone called it a consulting model the other day. I don't necessarily put a label on it, but the key thing for us is that value has to be provided. I can't just hand someone a ridiculous amount of compute and say, the compute's here, go crazy, right? Without understanding what exactly is it that you're trying to do that compute can help you do, right? That's another thing that we're working on. Let's go into the institutions. Let's go into the public and private spaces and say, okay, what are the challenges you see? What is it you're trying to achieve, right? And let's meet those needs specifically. That's what technology is supposed to do. So that's what we're going to do different from the existing data centers. We're not just a data center company. We're an infrastructure and software company, right? So we will build data centers where need be, so that we understand the space, we understand everything all the way from the infrastructure level. In spaces where there are data centers that exist that meet our requirements, we will use them, right? So it's not necessarily that we're going out and trying to compete with other data centers. If the infrastructure is not good enough, we'll go put in infrastructure. But if there's good enough infrastructure, we'll build on top of that.
Yeah, understood. Okay, so in this conference, there's also there's been a lot of discussion about demand, like real demand. Last year, people were pretty much like talking about hyperscalers and when the hyperscalers will come, and probably next year or in the next 6 months. They are still not here at scale. So now I think people slowly are trying to focus on other sources of demand. So who will be your customer?
Let's start out with the hyperscale conversation. I think a lot of I've worked for hyperscalers, so a lot of what we missed on the continent was the value conversation. Hyperscale is not just about building a massive data center, and saying, "Hey, I have real estate." And it's interesting that a lot of people in the data center business are actually coming from the real estate side. Hyperscale data centers are not just real estate, right? With everything going on with AI, it's sort of bubbled up a bit. It's magnified what the key components are: skills, energy, right? In order for me to provide you a highly available infrastructure, there's so many underlying pieces that have to be in place for that to happen, right? If I have 100,000 servers in a space and I have to cool them, what happens when my chillers or my cooling units go bad? How quickly can I get another one? How quickly can I get a technician to come fix that, right? If I have 200,000 square feet of real estate that I have to manage with servers in them, how many engineers or technicians can I find in this space, right? What educational institutions are focused in this space of learning that I can, pair with to ensure there's a pipeline of people that can service this? What is my conversation with governments, regulators, from a power perspective, right? How am I allowed to innovate? You see what I mean? So there's so many factors that are attached to it, not just even the commercial, how many people are in the country conversation. That's the economic bit, and that's crazy. And then you look at how the economics of hyperscalers. I have to go procure equipment in US dollars. I have to sometimes take financing from a bank to the tune of like triple digit millions. And a government wants me to pay in local currency, and you have the Forex difference. We all know how that's going to end, right? So there are quite a lot of factors that go into making a decision to make that level of a massive investment. And I don't know that we listened to what those metrics were, right? And so the conversation about will hyperscalers come, when will they come? The latency between here and West Europe is manageable. If I were in their position, financially, from an economic perspective, there's no need to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to shave off 100 milliseconds of latency in a market. You see what I mean? Like, I can route all that traffic to South Africa or to West Europe. So we didn't really pay attention to what the metrics were, right? And so that has sort of backfired to a certain degree.
So now that we started talking about the hyperscalers, so like if you can simplify, like what needs to happen, like if you're wearing the hyperscaler boots now, for you to make that investment decision to come, let's say, to Kenya.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we all saw there's some data that OpenAI published a few weeks ago. And the highest amount of ChatGPT traffic comes from Kenya, globally, right? That's thing number one. People are using it, right? The second thing, if you listen to some of these conferences when the guys from Meta spoke, a huge component of what drives hyperscalers is internet exchanges, right? How good is your peering? How many, networks converge in your data center? We still need to do a really good job with that on the continent. The other thing is, what is the pipeline for, skills. Are we producing the skill sets that are required for these things? And then from an economic perspective, of course, there's the number of people in the country, the whole nine yards. Again, from where I started, I do not think that today Africa needs hyperscalers. I think that our focus should be on actually bridging that digital divide. What is the demand internally? How can we meet that demand in a meaningful way? The thing we're trying to solve for is the demand, the value that we're going to provide. We're not trying to solve for hyperscalers, right? So we're looking at it from a different perspective, which is not the right perspective. You can't go solve for a hyperscaler. They've solved their problems already, right? So let's solve the problems that we have here at the scale that we can solve them, right? And so for us, we're not necessarily aiming for hyperscalers. There isn't anything on our roadmap that says our exit plan is, we're going to get Azure to buy this. It's going to be a success metric down the line, but the goal is let's go meet the needs here at the scale, at the small scale. There's a small, there's a medium, there's a hyperscale.
Yeah.
Let's go build what we need, meet the demands here. And if you look at what Netflix did, when Netflix was shipping out CDs to people, they were saying we're going to build a streaming network globally where you could just sit at home and request a movie and watch it. Everyone said, sure, great idea, right? Even Blockbuster was like, yeah, people are going to stop coming to rent, videos.
What a ridiculous idea.
Yeah, what a ridiculous idea, right? What we need to do is let's focus on this market. When you solve the problems in this market, you create the opportunity for people to now build the things that will drive the hyperscale demand. There's a time component in it, right? You build robust infrastructure, you build an ecosystem. People can now confidently experiment, get through their ideas till they get to the one that works, that generates the demand. And at that point, hyperscalers might say, oh man, there's plenty of demand here for us to now make the investment. What we're trying to do is take as many people out of poverty as possible to grow our economies and to give people a path to a meaningful life, right? The goal of governments or us as humanity is not to build hyperscalers. That's not the goal. The whole point of building a hyperscaler is to provide value at hyperscale, right? So we need to keep that in mind. And I think that's where we sort of missed it, right? And now back to your other question about who our customers are. For every place that we operate, our customers are the people we can provide value to. It could either be government, it could be enterprises, it could be, in fact, one of my goals is to always have something that works for the informal sector.
Because that's still a reality, and
yes.
It will be
yes,
remain a reality
in
this continent.
Yeah.
A lot of the economy is on the informal side.
Yeah, and a lot of people have asked me like, a lot of people say this and they never really make money from it and the whole nine yards. I know we call it the satellite economy, but I mean, look at what mobile penetration has done on the continent, right? The average African only spends money on something that can make them money. My goal is to figure out how to make you money, right? How to provide resources and provide value for you. When that happens, people will pay for it. You look at something like cell phones. Almost everybody has some sort of mobile device. And what does that do? It helps me bridge the communication gap. It helps me get information faster. It actually provides value. And that's why people pay for it, right? I can put, 10,000 Rwandan francs worth of airtime, and someone could put 100 Rwandan francs worth of airtime. We both have access, right? At the entry point that works for us, right? And now you also notice this thing on the continent where if I want to speak to you and I don't want to burn my airtime, if it's more important for you to speak to me, I call you, it rings and I disconnect, which forces you to call me back, right? You see how these clever mechanisms ensure that the value is still provided, but sort of the cost comes from your end, right? Mobile devices are one of the things I think has provided tremendous value to this continent. And if you look at how people use these things, they do not spend money until they know for a fact that there's something that expenditure is going to bring back something for them. I think Another mistake that we make is looking at the informal sector as how much can we make from them? How much is the average person? How much can they spend? Let's figure out how to provide value for them first, right? And when we provide that value, then they have something meaningful they can pay for, right? From the perspective of governments and enterprises, from a government perspective, I fundamentally believe that AI is going to be sovereign. It might not be the case right now.
Can you quickly just like simplify the term sovereign AI?
The use of AI in critical spaces, national security, defense, governance, will demand that the infrastructure, the compute, the data sits within the domain of countries, or at least regionally, right? So what that means is, whether we like it or not, some data centers AI data centers will be built in countries, either by governments, either by private entities, to meet that need for each country.
Thank you.
That's what our bet is. So from a government perspective, the value it provides is the ability to sort of shape how AI helps you in your domain. Going back to what I said earlier about the story. We live in a world right now where the AI story is sort of written by the US or China, right? But in reality, over time, you're going to realize that the Chinese story is not your story, neither is the American story really your story. People want to tell their stories, right? And what that will inform is, I mean, you're already seeing this in the EU, where a lot of the EU, I think Denmark the other day, is pushing really hard to say, let's get off of having our data, having our compute in the US or with US companies. Let's come back internally and build within the EU and guarantee that our stuff sticks within the EU, and that our usage of this reflects what we want to see the European Union look like. The EU is not going to be alone in that, right? Most countries are going to invest in their own sovereign infrastructure, one way or another. So from a government perspective, our goal is to ensure that, wherever we operate, we at least provide that infrastructure for governments to start. On the African continent, what I think is most important is, let's put the infrastructure and say, we have some infrastructure at a small scale. Let's help you understand how it can provide value to what you're doing, right? In civil service, how can we now, if you look at AI as sort of, for each GPU, that's like 10 times a person in terms of output. How do we scale your labor force, right? And provide you much, much more value that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Do you see what I mean, right? That's the value it provides to governments, so that you can actually spend your time in actual governance, right? And be the human in the loop. That's the value we believe we can provide to governments. Let's seed the infrastructure. Let's seed the compute. Let's seed the capabilities. And then from that point on, you can say, okay, I'm going to make more investment in this, or let's keep it at the scale that it is, but get African governments started. And then from the institution, from the public perspective, a lot of public institutions, financial institutions, small businesses could very well benefit from this. This is your, not to be the Microsoft lifer, but this is your co-pilot, essentially, right? To help people understand how this can be the intelligent assistant that helps augment what your output is. There's a lot of talk about, AI is going to kill us and it's going to destroy humanity and the whole 9 yards. There isn't a single tool that humans have created that we haven't managed to use to destroy ourselves and to also bring value. Guns are used for peacekeeping. Guns are also used for wars, right? What matters is that we start to seed, right? The compute, the capacity, and one other critical aspect of it is the safety, ethics, right? It's important to start, and I'll put it this way, right? Some things are universal morals, quote unquote. The concept of ethics is still very localized. It's still very domain specific, right? It's important that people shape the safety and the ethics around usage based on their local context and what they're cultures are, right? So it's super critical for that component to be there as well, to ensure that in the long term, this provides value and not destruction. It also empowers the rest of the world to have a seat at the table, right? I mean, we see what's going on globally with regards to geopolitics, right? I think it is super critical for countries not to be in a state where an external entity gets to dictate what the output, AI output is for you, or how you're going to use it in the whole nine yards. So from a government perspective, sovereignty, for businesses, value, for the informal sector, exponential capacity, right? If I looked at this as, typical factory scenario, I have 3 skill levels: a junior skill technician, a medium skill technician, and a senior technician. What I expect AI to do is to take the junior technician, right, put in their hands the capabilities of the senior technician for the junior and the medium, tier technician. And for the senior technician, it should help them do what they typically would do in 5 to 8 hours. It should help them do it in an hour to 2. That's the way I see it. It should augment, but AI works best when there's a human companion, right? And so for every category that we look at, the goal is to help you extend your capabilities, to help you fast track, to help you, do more in a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you. I think that the whole thing really, really clarifies some of the, especially on the sovereign AI topic and all that. I feel a lot smarter already. Incredible. Hey, let's do a top 3 list. Just shortly. Top 3 reasons why Africa needs AI.
Top 3 reasons Africa needs AI. I think there's still a lot of challenges on the continent. Again, like I said, what AI helps you do is to actually get more output in a smaller amount of time. AI is sort of the cheat code to time, right? There up to this moment, there have been quite a lot of things that are just primarily a function of time. We haven't eliminated all of them, but we've reduced that count. So, everyone talks about Africa leapfrogging. I think this will help Africa not leapfrog. It'll put Africa in a supercar and put them on the German highway. Escapes me now, but Autobahn.
Autobahn.
Yeah. It's Africa in a supercar on the Autobahn. That's what I expect AI to be. You still can't get from point A to point B in light speed.
So accelerate,
yes.
Development and growth.
On the African continent, there's going to be a lot of innovation. I still maintain that the solution to a lot of the world's problems are in the minds of kids who haven't eaten today. Let's get them food. You and I are no longer qualified to solve some problems. We just don't know the reality of it firsthand, right? But we need to go empower people who know the reality to solve those problems, right? So I think it's going to drive a lot of innovation. It's also going to drive a lot of creativity. There's another part of me that's very much an artist. I love creativity. If I'm not painting or playing music, I am curious to see. I mean, if you look back, during the Renaissance and the paintings that came out, and it was like this profound thing. And I'm pretty sure at the time people thought, man, there can be nothing better. I mean, we have models that are generating images just on like prompts. If you woke up, Da Vinci and showed him that, bro, he'd go back right back to sleep and say, you know what, can't deal with this. It's mind blowing how far we've come, right? And I think what will happen on the African continent is you're now going to see that level of creativity from music, from dance, from creative arts, right? All of that will boom significantly. And those are the top 3 things I'm looking forward to. Yeah.
Great. So we spoke about this already a little bit, but the US and China are obviously leading the AI race. On the other side, Europe is busy with regulating AI. And also, other parts of the world are trying to figure out how to keep up. So is there an AI sub-race, you think, Africa could still lead or win? Is that innovation somehow related?
Yes, I think there's a sub race we can lead with. What Africa has been really good at is doing quite a lot with very little, right? If you give us older GPUs, I wonder what we can squeeze out from them, right? You give us new GPUs, whoa, right? I think there's the space that Africa can lead in is to figure out how to do a lot more with less compute. We're not going to be spending $5 to $6 billion on a 1.2 gigawatt hyperscaler. How can we drive output with the little that we have? I think that's where the sweet spot is. Whatever the US comes up with, whatever China comes up with, and whatever regulation Europe comes up with, we should be the melting pot. Put all these three things together and actually now get the best of all three, right? That's where I think it benefits us. Because for the most part, yes, every country tries to align in the whole 9 yards, but it is the case that, I mean, we saw what happened with DeepSeek, right? At some point, when China makes chips that are just as performant as NVIDIA, the market's going to open up, because now it's like, I want to sell my chips to everyone as quickly and as cheaply as possible. These things, hopefully will become commodities and the price drops in the whole 9 yards. But our goal now is to sort of look at what's available and start iterating with what's available, right? So that we can now drive true innovation from that. And I also think that one of the spaces that we can lead with is actually in conjunction with the EU to not push for too much regulation, but more so safety, right? We have unfortunately been the continent that sort of takes the outcome, the negative outcome of whatever gets produced, right? So we should lead the charge from a safety perspective. What is the long-term impact of this? Ethically, should we be doing this, right? What should we say no to? What should we say yes to? I think that's a space that I think we can do very well in, but regulation in a way that doesn't stifle innovation. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So, by the way, I'll ask you, we have 10 minutes. Do you have, officially 10 minutes, but do you have a meeting already at 11?
Oh, no, it's okay.
So we can go a little bit beyond. Great, because I think we will. So you already mentioned that you came to Rwanda because of you have a Rwandan wife. But was there not a purpose or reason why you really wanted to take the challenge on building AI infrastructure in Africa?
This is going to be an interesting one. It's actually almost full circle. My entire sort of tech career has revolved around not only building really cool stuff, but also thinking, how does this impact Africa? In 2017, myself and a couple of friends at Microsoft came up with this idea that we should have a conference in Africa where we get, sponsored by Microsoft, where we get developers together and start really talking about how to build the ecosystem across the continent. Funny enough, that conference was held in this very hotel in 2017, Next Tech Africa. And we were able to get thousands of people from across the world to converge here in Nairobi, have conversations. At the time, a lot of what we were focusing on was it was mostly connectivity, right? And how to bridge the gap in connectivity, right? Some places have access to backbone, some places don't. From 2017, fast forward, 2018, 2019, we, pushed hard again, got Microsoft to commit to putting engineering on the continent. An engineering center, a dev center in Lagos, a dev center in Nairobi. And then research. Nairobi still exists today. There's a huge Microsoft team here in Nairobi, along with Microsoft Research. And so my entire career has always been, okay, I'm building this cool stuff. How does this map to the continent? What can we do on the continent? So the passion didn't just start now, right? It's always been there. And the eventual goal was always to learn as much as I can and sort of bridge that gap to say, how can we move the continent along with the knowledge we have and sort of connect the dots across what the rest of the world is doing. And so my if I hadn't been in Rwanda, I would be somewhere else doing the same thing, right? I would either be in Lagos, Nigeria, where I'm originally from, or I would be here in Nairobi. I really do like Nairobi. So it's not so much that, this has always been the journey, right? Now, one of the things you learn in engineering is when you look at a problem, the first thing you do is you break the problem down into smaller chunks and you solve up, right? In order to have long-term feasibility and to actually learn at the lowest cost point, you pick a place where the variables are, manageable. Rwanda is a good place for that, right? If you look at it from a market perspective, Lagos is a big market. Nigeria is a big market. But again, you look at what hasn't worked in this space on the continent, you can't do the same thing, right? A lot of people sort of take it from the commercial angle and say, what's the biggest market? Yeah, big market, big challenges. Not that we're afraid of big challenges, but it is very important to iterate and get quick feedback to learn how to build things properly, right? Rwanda is a great place for that. And Rwanda also gives you that access to other markets where it helps you, okay, if I want to fly to Lagos, there's a Rwanda flight directly to Lagos, right? There's a double taxation agreement with Nigeria, right? And so you start to look at the most important dials you need to turn. Where can you turn those dials? Where do you have access to those dials, right? And you also look at a country like Rwanda and you say, when you make the impact, right? It's going to be so substantial for countries like Rwanda. You see what I mean? Like the growth will be much, much more impactful. So those are some of the deciding factors that say, okay, Rwanda is a great place to start to go get things done. And also there is, from the top, there is a willingness. You're encouraged to go do things, right? You're encouraged to go try. You're encouraged to experiment. And so that really helps, right? Having lived in the US for the last 20 years, one of the great things about the US is if you have an idea, sure, go try it. If it works, you sit across people and they give you money and say, go for it, right? It doesn't really matter, their innovation is encouraged, right? Yeah. Entrepreneurship is encouraged. It has its challenges, but for the most part, that is still, you look at the non-compete laws in California. That's the reason why I can work for you today. And you hire me today, and by the end of the day, I say, sorry, I'm leaving, I'm going to OpenAI, they're paying me $100 million. There's no law that says I can't do that. And so what happens is the smartest people come in, they congregate, right? And they're able to move around and learn things and build things and experiment.
Fast.
Yeah, very quickly. And people can sort of shuffle around to where their interests are. So when you look at places where you can do that, that's where you go start. Yeah.
Yeah. So next question, I'll involve your business partner happens to be in the room, so you can also chip in if you wish. What are some of the toughest lessons you've learned so far doing this project in Rwanda?
Okay, let's see. Toughest challenges.
We can do top three.
Top three, yeah. I think we're still, in as much as it's a place to innovate, there's still, the continent is still not, we're still building sort of the muscle for startups. What people tend to see first is risk. And risk guides their decisions and informs sort of their decision making. The perception, right? Not to fault them, a lot of countries, a lot of institutions have been burned before, right? So when you say you're going to do something, the first thing you're met with is hesitation. We're still not used to people it's like a chicken and egg problem. I want to do this thing. Have you done it before? No. Well, how do you know you're going to do it? How do we trust you're going to do it? Well, before anyone did anything, they hadn't done it before, right?
Yeah,
so it's kind of a tough one, right? But that will sort of dissipate over time when there's a good number of examples where people start from zero and go achieve whatever it is they set out to do, right? So one of the biggest challenges is still the hesitation and the lack of willingness to sort of let people go try. I always say this. I firmly believe everybody has a risk budget, right? If you look at us in this room, there's 5 of us. My risk budget might be $100. Yours might be $50. His might be $200. Yours might be $2,000. We all have a risk budget. That's like the thing we can commit to and say, okay, well, if it fails, it fails. I'm not going to lose sleep, right? It doesn't knock you out completely. Now, what happens when we combine our risk budget? It gets bigger, right? One of the things I think we haven't really done well, or that I still see as a challenge, is we don't know how to combine our risk budget. We don't know how to articulate what our risk budget is, and we don't know how to combine it. Everybody has a risk budget. It doesn't matter if it's 50 cents, right? But what we need to do is figure out a way to aggregate our risk budget and then a portion from that to say, okay, you want to go try this thing. How about you go do step number 1? We're going to give you everything you need, unblock you to go achieve step number 1. Sure, you did that. Okay, let's try step number 2. If you failed, what are the lessons? That's what we want back, right? Give us a 1-pager, give us a 2-pager. What worked, what didn't work? Guess what that does? We allocate that again to our risk budget. So the next guy coming along, we're like, by the way, here's some risk, and this is what you don't do. Right? And you move forward that way. So I think one of the things that we really haven't figured out or done well is articulating what a risk budget is, aggregating it, and knowing how to apportion it. The third thing is we are still very much in a reactive mode. And, most African countries, not to blame them, it's understandable. When you feel like you have a little bit of handle on the economy or sort of, on the country, it's very hard for you to start looking to take any kind of risk. It's like, okay, hold everything together. We just barely got it all together. But organizations don't succeed when, an organization that doesn't sort of have a risk arm or goes out and pokes around and tries things will eventually die. I hate to say this, Nokia, right? On the African continent, to date, my parents still ask me, doesn't Nokia make some of these smartphones we can buy? The 3310 is the lifeblood of that phone, right there. There's one in his pocket. Yes. Beautiful. I have one at home, right?
Wow.
And so...
show it to the camera. This makes me proud as a Finn.
Right there.
It's right there.
And I'll tell you, Nokia to date, right, is part of the African existence. The product worked. It did very well. I mean, you throw that thing in mud, pick it out 3 years later on the battery, stick it back in, it works, right? Nokia did everything right, right? But in an age where people were taking massive amounts of risk, I don't think Nokia took as much risk.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And that cost them dearly, right? What we cannot afford to do is not take risk.
Yep.
Right? It's like, it's the electricity that keeps our hearts pumping, right? So yes, we've done something good. We need to start moving into the future, right? I mean, SpaceX, for example, right? And of course, risk budgets, magnitude, the whole 9 yards. But some crazy guy decided, I'm going to strap humans on top of what's an equivalent of a nuclear warhead and then ship them off into space. And a bunch of poor bastards said, guess what? We'll volunteer. We'll be the ones who get strapped on. And we have space programs. We have thoughts of going to Mars. We have space stations, right? I mean, if you go back to when this thing was still a novelty, this was a stupid idea. This was a terribly stupid idea. I'm going to strap humans to the top of a nuclear warhead, an equivalent of a nuclear warhead, and ship them off into a place we've never seen before. And a bunch of people said, brilliant. We'll put money into it. Might be a good idea, right? We have satellites. We have space imaging. We cannot afford not to take risk.
I wish I was in the room when they pitched the idea for the first time.
I would have said it was stupid. I'm not going to lie. I would have said it was stupid. But having seen where we are today, we need to dare to dream, right? Yeah. We need to all find what our risk budget is and say, how can we push forward?
That's great. What's the one thing that makes you most worried about the future of African digital infrastructure?
The thing that makes me, again, quite frankly, it's if we refuse to take risk, if our governments don't see where the future is going and take the same approach they've taken to most things, right? Let's wait and see. Well, it's going to cost us so much. We need to literally operate like startups at this point. The US is going back into sort of like protectionist mode because it's super critical that they understand this AI thing, build it out, understand where the vulnerabilities are, become the best at it, and then sell it to the rest of the world, right? African governments need to take a startup mindset. There are people within every country that are fully capable of doing the work required to go take the risk to sort of move this thing forward. I know a bunch of crazy people like me from every part of the continent, right? How do we get them the financing they need? How do we help them understand where we need to find value? And how do we set them loose, right? Africa needs to empower its operators to go get stuff done, right? We can't, it's also the case that you've seen all these like data privacy rules and data regulatory rules across multiple countries. I look at some of these countries and there's no infrastructure. What are you protecting? Right? Like let's be honest, at the end of the day, most people's data will still go to AWS somewhere in South Africa or somewhere in Europe. You don't understand what it is you're trying to protect. You have no handle on it, right? So instead of going the route of like, okay, we put the regulations and you hamper innovation, why don't you actually let people innovate so that you understand the full scope of what it is you're trying to protect, right? That's a very critical component.
Yeah, I was going to say also the barriers for entrepreneurs just to get into business.
Yeah.
Look at the amount of effort we're putting in just to create a structure.
Yep.
Can you say that again to the microphone?
So he just said the barriers of entry for entrepreneurs, right? Taxes. You can't squeeze taxes out of a guy who's making $200 a month trying to experiment.
They're trying.
It doesn't make any sense at all, right? You also cannot expect them at that point to worry about the complexities of when to pay the tax at what point and the fines and the penalties. That's one thing, right? You also look at how to structure businesses. There's a lot of complexity around that. Can we simplify it to say, if you're in this category, sub this much revenue in this sector, here's a template for what you need, and you can't be bothered with boards and nonsense until you get to this point, right? Go build your product, get to doing the thing very quickly. We need to provide the mechanisms that allow people to go innovate, not hamper them with regulation or, and then also from a financial perspective, banks in Africa are doing pretty well. Most banks are doing pretty well, right? There needs to be, through banking, an opportunity for people to say, look, here's a no condition, $5,000 to go play in this space. In fact, I think countries should, in engineering, so, you have a backlog of issues that you go to solve. I think countries should have backlogs. Here are all the things that we need to go solve for. You pick one off that table and you start going, then we'll help you get it moved along, right? One of the very interesting things that I constantly look at is procurement requests from either Department of Energy, DOD, things that are publicly listed. We want a company that's going to build a nuclear, powered space rocket. There's a tender, right? Government tenders, right? How do we, if you look at government tenders today, there are like mega restrictions. How do we create tenders for prototyping? I don't know that this thing is going to work. We're looking for 5 entrepreneurs who are going to give 50 grand, and you're going to sit in this room for the next 3 months and see if this thing actually is possible. We need to take a completely different approach on the continent. And it's super critical that we make conscious effort to unblock entrepreneurs.
And to be able to move fast.
Yeah.
Okay, so what gives you hope for the future? What keeps you going?
This generation is entirely crazy, and I like that.
And this generation is
Gen Z. I'll call them Gen Z.
okay.
They don't take no for an answer. They've also luckily had the benefit of seeing how the rest of the world is working and how the rest of the world operates. I mean, there's the TikToks and the Instagrams in front of our faces. It has removed the fear to try, right? Every day we see people in Kigali who are shooting TikTok videos on the street, and this was not a norm 10 years ago, 10 years ago, right? The thing I love about the continent is that we've never failed to sort of surprise and shock, the rest of the world in terms of what we come up with. That gives me hope. What I'm counting on is that when you put AI in the hands of people, you will see a lot more of that. And most of these problems, people will start tackling, right? I'm looking forward to the day where people say, okay, how do we figure out how to solve hunger in our small locale, right? Is there anywhere we can source, produce from that's being discarded? Is there any way we can sort of fill a gap? Those are the creative niches that you're going to find. And that's what I'm super excited for, because when that person goes to solve that problem, they're not going to deal with logistical nightmares, right? I can very quickly go ask a model, what is the best way to move this from point A to point B? Who are the key people that I need to talk to? You see what I mean? Because typically when you build a business, there's still a lot of dependencies to get that going, right? A lot of these things can now be solved. How can I go ask a model, look, if I'm going to serve people food, what are the regulatory things I should be aware of in this country? You see what the difference is? I can get that in a minute versus going to this institution, going to that institution. Now, how do we automate that where, well, if you go fill this form, we'll send it out to the person who needs to approve it, and it can get approved, right? So some of these things are where I see there being value, because it could short circuit the distance from ideation to your first prototype, right? And that's the thing that I'm most excited for, what people will use AI for once you put it in their hands.
Finally, why should we care about African data centers? Shortly.
Why should we care about African data centers? They will power things that help us innovate. They are in the realm of critical infrastructure. They're as crucial as electricity and, quite frankly, almost as food, right? This is what will be the underpinning of success for economies, for countries. It's the extra manpower that you can add to your country. So it should be taken very seriously. Yep.
Thanks, Raymond.
Thank you.
It was great having you on.
A pleasure.
Thanks for the chat.
Thank you.
Great.
This podcast is part of the Data Governance in Africa initiative, helping the African Union shape data policies, enable cross-border data flows, and build secure, sustainable digital infrastructure. Funded by the EU and 5 member states, it supports a unified digital market in Africa.